You debate on the resurrection. Usually when you try to push a guy, he's not Christian, and you push him. I think it's great when they pick a naturalistic theory. Because if they pick a naturalistic theory, they identify where they're coming from, and you can bring all the data against that, and we can see if it adds up or doesn't add up. So here's what I'd say. They thought they saw. If no other explanation can give me a better account, I'm justified in saying they saw. That's how I'd answer. I don't know if that's exactly answering your question. That's how I go after it. Everyone concedes this. So let's try this. And if this doesn't work, I'm not saying I have proof. I'm not saying this is airtight. I'm not saying this is academic certainty for you philosophers. I'm saying this is a probabilistic argument. Like all empirical arguments, is probabilistic. They thought they saw. These don't seem to work. This is probably true. That's the way I'd state the argument. Go ahead. Did you want to follow up?
So, I mean, I'm guessing if you addressed a lot naturalistic theories and found them to be highly probable.
Yeah, in the last book I did in this, I spent 100 pages on it. I mean, we did some wild things. I'll be doing this and someone will say, I know somebody who saw Elvis. We'll check all that kind of stuff. So we did 100 pages in our last book. It's called, myself and one of my former students, Mike Lacona. It's called The Case of the Resurrection of Jesus, curriculum. 350 pages. 100 of them are on the green part. I've got my doctoral dissertation and almost 100 pages on the green part. So I do this for my professors too. Because see, most of my professors on my committee didn't believe in the resurrection. Yes?
That ties in with my question. What did you get on your dissertation?
They don't grade it. It's pass-fail. I passed. They did not make me add even one sentence or take away a sentence. They didn't make me do anything. That was very nice. Yes.
How did you become a believer?
The resurrection. Well, okay, I got to back up. I was raised in a Christian home, but that's what I walked away from. So if you want to say, when did I first come? I guess I did what a lot of people do. The majority of people, I just accepted it on faith. Then I had all these questions. So if you mean what got me back when I had this time of turmoil, which lasted like 10 years, it was studying the resurrection. Therefore, when I make believe this, what it would be like when my wife was dying, if the Lord talked to me, I think He'd give it right back to me again, because that took me back to my home base. Yes?
I'm sure you're aware of Bart Ehrman.
Yes, I know him.
Okay. Well, he makes the claim, well, you mentioned earlier that Paul included in his apostle and his writings about Jesus being a deity. And I know that...
about Jesus being what?
A deity? I mean, you said deity.
That Paul taught the deity of Jesus?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
And so Bart Ehrman claims that Jesus is never quoted as saying that he claimed he was God until in John, like at the very end. And so what's your response to that?
I agree with him. But not the end part. I agree with him at the beginning. Jesus at no point in the Gospels ever says, I am God. Never says it. The question is, does he say things that effectively mean the same thing? I would say there are several things that he says which critical scholarship allows. I'll use the same minimal facts deal. And I think he says things about himself that could only be true if he believed that he was deity. And I think the two most interesting titles that worthy of a lot of research, and a lot has been done on these two titles, Son of God and Son of Man. You might think Son of Man is a human title. Most people think that it's a title in this other category, messiahship, that kind of thing. I think what Jesus says is Son of Man, about Son of Man and Son of God, what he said about himself, puts himself in a whole other light and makes you think that either, at face value you say, oh man, I've never seen this guy do anything wrong. I've seen him do what appear to be miracles and so on and so on. This guy seems to be somebody special, but you kind of walk away and you're still scratching your head. I think the resurrection kind of sealed that this guy really was who he was talking about. So I think we have to go back to what he was saying. Now John, think about this for a second. Jesus called God about 7 times in the New Testament. A lot of these times depend on Greek syntax. For example, one of the main questions that we talk about One of the main texts that are brought up is Romans 9:5. There's some discussion about the syntax there. Was Paul talking about God the Father or Jesus the Son being God? But if Romans 9:5 goes in there, it's real early, right? But again, I don't think anything rests on whether Jesus says, I am God. I don't think that really amounts to much. If he says, I am, and I mean the credited verses that where scholars take real seriously, this is a whole big story. There have maybe been more dissertations done on Son of Man than almost any other New Testament topics. I mean, these are huge topics. But I think Son of Man and Son of God are two of the keys. And if he made those claims, and I think there are ways, see, critics accept verses in the New Testament when they meet certain criteria. Again, remember the guys on my committee? We don't care if it's the New Testament. You're free to use the New Testament all you want, but just be able to back up the verses you choose to use. You can't just say the whole thing looks good. So they have rules they use. And these verses for Son of God and Son of Man are confirmed by the same rules they use elsewhere. That's where I think, if you want to read something of this that's real recent, Larry Hurtado's two big books. And he doesn't even come out in the same place I do. I'm just saying if you want to read the most up-to-date stuff, he's professor of New Testament theology at Edinburgh University. Larry Hurtado's two huge books. How in the world did Jesus become God? That's one of them. And he's been studying this one topic. Who did Jesus think he was? He's been studying this for 30 years. Just that he specializes in that topic. So I'd say go to those two books, both published by Erdman's, Larry Hurtado, Hurtado. Well, that's about 150 AD, and that's really early for a Gnostic book. If you say the Gospel of Truth, which has a fairly orthodox view of resurrection, maybe 150. If you use Gospel of Thomas, maybe 25 or 50 years after that. And then the other ones, you get a lot of them from 300s and 400s. Okay, now here's my problem with putting this on my time scale. Why should I, when I'm talking about resurrection, why should I ignore Paul and this little council from back here, ignore the next council from here, ignore the next council from here, ignore 1 Corinthians 15, ignore Mark, ignore Matthew, ignore Luke, ignore John, and say, let me tell you something. I think the best sources are like 100 years out there. And yet I started right up front and put these on the table, so I'm not pulling them off the table. When you do ancient history or any history, you want to get right time and right place. Gospels don't make it. I'm sorry, the Gnostic Gospels don't make it. So Tom Wright, in his, you want to read a 750-page book on this, 500 pages are devoted to this question. And his argument is this. Whenever the two main New Testament words, Gnosticis and Agero, the two major Greek words for raised and resurrection, those two key words, whenever they were used in the ancient world, whenever, Tom Wright's thesis is, whenever they were used by pagans, that's not a derogatory term, I mean unbelievers, that's Tom Wright's term, pagans, Jews, Christians, the word Gnosticis and Agero always and only mean bodily resurrection. Whenever you use that word, it means bodily resurrection, up until 200 AD. And then the Gnostics start using a different definition. Now you could say, wait a minute, are you telling me the Greeks don't believe in the immortality of the soul? Haven't you ever read Plato? Let's wait a minute. I'm not telling you nobody believes spirits rise. That's a view. We put that on the table. But they don't use the word resurrection for that. That's his argument. So whenever they use resurrection, they mean bodily. He argues, Tom Wright argues for 700 pages, that it always and only meant bodily until 200 AD. And then it took on a new meaning. And I'm saying that's not the best way to do history, and read back and tell me what these guys meant according to those sources way out there. That flunks the test, I think, for history. I think you got a lot to prove. I don't mean you, but I think you have a lot to prove to pull that back on the table and say that's early. Yes, Brendan.
What about, Bart Ehrman and this debate with him and Craig, whenever the nationalistic theory was proposed, and, basically after all of them were refuted everything, William Lane Craig was like, the best explanation is about the resurrection of Jesus. And, Bart Ehrman says, I can't conceive of that because, basically a miracle and other stuff is improbable. And so, I can't conceive of that. What do you say on that?
I'd say two things. This is a philosophical dispute about miracles. And I know in his, he generally cites David Hume for this, right? Most people do. So let me make a comment about